The year is 1929. The stock market crashes, sending shockwaves through Wall Street and collapsing fortunes overnight. Chaos reigns as once powerful industrialists lose everything, and breadlines stretch for miles. But amidst the turmoil, one family quietly weathers the storm, untouched by the financial ruin consuming the world around them. Their wealth isn't just money, it's influence, networks, and assets carefully insulated from the volatility of markets. As their neighbors scramble to sell off family heirlooms, they pour resources into philanthropic causes, becoming champions of the public good in a world desperate for stability. But who is this family, and why do they support the left? And how is it that they not only survived the greatest economic upheavals of the past, but have solidified their power in the 21st century? To answer this, we need to peel back the layers of history, privilege, and strategy. This isn't just one family, it's a pattern replicated across dynasties. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Vanderbilts, and even newer names like the Gates or Buffetts, who have seamlessly adopted the playbook of old money. Their power transcends cash. It's about control of industries, narratives, and even ideologies. What's remarkable isn't just their wealth, but their ability to remain at the top without drawing too much scrutiny. They've mastered the art of subtlety, blending influence with altruism, shaping public policy while appearing as benefactors of humanity. But how did they do it? And why, in a world increasingly divided by class, does their power seem untouchable? The secret lies in understanding their long game. Old money families learned centuries ago that direct confrontation with the masses, whether through outright hoarding or aggressive exploitation, leads to rebellion. From the French Revolution to the labor strikes of the industrial era, history taught them a critical lesson: appear to give, and you can keep everything. This is where their alignment with progressive causes comes in. By championing social welfare, environmental causes, and redistributive policies, they create an illusion of shared interests. But beneath the surface, these moves reinforce their position, insulating their wealth and ensuring their influence persists. But why does this work? And what role does society play in keeping these families untouchable? The answers are as fascinating as they are unsettling. I've been a researcher and investor for over 20 years, and this is what I've learned about old money. One of the reasons old money supports the left lies in the environment in which they are raised. Growing up in environments filled with wealth and privilege shapes their worldview in profound ways. These families often emphasize values such as philanthropy, cultural refinement, and intellectual pursuit. The absence of immediate economic pressures allows members of these families to view issues through a lens of idealism rather than survival. Consider someone like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a scion of a wealthy New York family. Raised in luxury, Roosevelt attended elite schools like Groton and Harvard, which cultivated a sense of social responsibility in him. His New Deal policies may seem like a paradox for someone of his background, but they reflect a common thread in old money ideology, maintaining stability through controlled reform. In elite environments, such as Ivy League institutions or upscale social hubs, progressive views are often equated with moral and intellectual superiority. Adopting these positions becomes almost a requirement to fit in. It's not uncommon for heirs to dynastic fortunes to publicly champion environmental or social justice causes, even when the implications of these causes might not align entirely with their financial interests. But here's where it gets interesting. How much of this is genuine altruism, and how much is calculated self-preservation? The concept of noblesse oblige, the moral obligation of the privileged to help the less fortunate, is a recurring theme among old money families. This idea, however, is not purely altruistic. While it might appear as a selfless act of generosity, it often serves as a strategic move to pacify societal unrest and maintain the status quo. Andrew Carnegie, one of the wealthiest industrialists of the Gilded Age, exemplifies this dynamic. Carnegie built his fortune in steel, often through ruthless business practices that crushed competitors and exploited workers. Yet, later in life, he became a philanthropist, funding libraries, universities, and cultural institutions. His Gospel of Wealth emphasized the importance of redistributing excess wealth for the betterment of society. But make no mistake, this philanthropy also protected his legacy and softened the harsh perception of his business dealings. This pattern repeats with modern old money families who fund initiatives to address inequality while benefiting from the same systems that perpetuate it. For example, supporting public education reform or healthcare expansion may seem generous, but such moves also stabilize society, reducing the risk of upheaval that could threaten their privileged position. Let's explore another layer: guilt over inherited privilege. Could it be that many heirs to old money support left-leaning policies because they feel an ethical responsibility to correct the imbalance their wealth represents? Or is it a more calculated attempt to reshape public perception, ensuring that they remain untouchable in the eyes of the masses? One example comes from the Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller, once one of the most reviled industrialists in America, invested heavily in philanthropy toward the latter part of his life. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the Rockefeller Foundation is widely regarded as a champion of environmental and social causes. But here's the twist: the same family initially amassed its fortune through monopolistic practices in the oil industry, contributing significantly to industrial pollution. This brings us to the ultimate question: is guilt a genuine motivator or merely a mask for strategic self-interest? Rewinding to the mid-20th century, when philanthropy had become more than a moral gesture, it was a strategic play. The Ford family, heirs to the Ford Motor Company empire, pioneered this approach with the establishment of the Ford Foundation in 1936. On the surface, it was a beacon of progressive values, funding education, human rights, and environmental conservation. Behind the scenes, however, it was a masterstroke of wealth preservation. By donating large portions of their fortune to the foundation, the Fords not only secured significant tax exemptions, but also gained influence over the societal narrative. The Ford Foundation, with its progressive mission, shaped public opinion, distancing the family name from the exploitative practices of early industrialization. While their money worked to support societal change, the family itself remained insulated from the economic shifts that others faced. This pattern repeated across old money families. Philanthropy became their shield, protecting wealth while projecting altruism. By funding causes that resonated with the public, civil rights, environmentalism, education, they created an image of benevolence. But the true brilliance of their strategy lay in the tax laws that allowed these donations to escape heavy government levies. Even in modern times, this tactic endures. Through massive philanthropic organizations, old money families maintain their wealth, grow their influence, and dictate societal priorities, all while being celebrated for their generosity. The wealth that once built empires now shapes ideologies, keeping the elite at the helm of a changing world. What about the competition of the elite? Let's go back to 1935. The United States is still grappling with the fallout of the Great Depression, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt has just introduced the Revenue Act, ushering in higher taxes on the wealthy and the first estate tax. On the surface, this bold move seems aimed at redistributing wealth, breaking up massive fortunes, and giving the middle class a fighting chance. But behind closed doors, the old money elite are already adapting, finding ways to turn this challenge into an opportunity to entrench their dominance. Take the Rockefellers as an example. By the mid-20th century, this family, whose wealth was built on the Standard Oil empire, had mastered the art of leveraging philanthropy and legal frameworks to maintain their fortune across generations. As progressive taxation rose, the Rockefellers established charitable foundations that not only preserved their wealth, but allowed them to wield significant influence in public policy, science, and the arts. While their donations funded medical research and universities, These charitable vehicles shielded a substantial portion of their assets from estate taxes, ensuring the family's financial empire remained intact. Meanwhile, in the realm of regulations, old money families like the Rockefellers found ways to make progressive policies work in their favor. Environmental regulations in the oil industry, for instance, required substantial compliance costs that the Rockefellers' companies could afford, while smaller competitors often could not. This left the playing field dominated by established giants, allowing old money to thrive even as they outwardly supported the policies that ostensibly reined them in. This pattern repeats across industries. In finance, stringent regulations disproportionately burden upstart firms, while old money-backed institutions remain unshaken. In technology, entrenched giants can influence regulations that make it harder for disruptive startups to scale. Each rule or tax that appears progressive on the surface often serves a dual purpose: a tool for societal good and a mechanism to protect the established elite. By aligning with these progressive policies, old money not only avoids the appearance of greed, but actively reshapes the system. The rules, while seemingly fair, are subtly tilted in their favor, making it nearly impossible for new wealth to rise and challenge their supremacy. Now let's move on to how education is tied to old money and the left. Now picture this: the auditorium buzzed with anticipation as the dean of one of America's most prestigious universities took the stage. It was the 1960s, a period of cultural awakening, and the elite institution had just announced a groundbreaking initiative, a fully funded scholarship program aimed at underprivileged communities. The crowd erupted in applause, but few in attendance understood the deeper story behind this act of generosity. In the shadows of this announcement was the Ford Foundation. Through such acts, old money families like the Fords subtly shaped the cultural narrative. The progressive policies they championed were undeniably transformative, but they also ensured that institutions like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, long associated with old money dynasties, remained the gatekeepers of social mobility. By deciding who was granted access to elite circles, these families controlled not only the present, but the future of the nation's power dynamics. In 1967, the Ford Foundation made headlines for its substantial contributions to civil rights and education reform. Behind the scenes, this move was as much about crafting public goodwill as it was about maintaining influence over society's values. By controlling the flow of resources to progressive causes, the Ford family and other elites ensured their place as arbiters of culture and intellect, shaping not only who could rise, but how far they could go. Now let's dive into the most controlled sector by the elites, the media. The newsroom hummed with the sound of clattering typewriters and the occasional ring of a desk phone. It was the same decade, the 1960s, a decade marked by sweeping social change, and the New York Times newsroom was at the heart of it all. Beneath the paper's bold headlines about civil rights marches and environmental protests lay the steady hand of the Sulzberger family, old money elites who had owned the publication for generations. The Sulzbergers weren't just newspaper proprietors, they were cultural architects. By championing progressive causes in their editorials and investigative pieces, they positioned themselves not only as purveyors of information, but also as shapers of public discourse. Civil rights, gender equality, environmental conservation, these issues found unwavering support on the pages of the Times, aligning with the societal shifts of the era. But this wasn't purely altruistic. Behind the progressive front was a calculated strategy to secure their influence. By aligning with left-leaning ideologies, the Sulzbergers ensured that the New York Times remained relevant, authoritative, and indispensable to society's intellectual elite. Their progressive stance appealed to an educated readership, the very people shaping public policy and cultural norms. Through their control of the media, the Sulzbergers didn't just report the news, they curated the narrative. And in doing so, they maintained their position as gatekeepers of culture, ensuring their influence extended beyond their wealth and into the ideological heart of the nation. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment on what you think about old money. How would you solve the issue of control? If you have any questions, be sure to write it below. Make sure to turn your notifications on so you get updated on when I post. Until next time.